Hello everybody, it's me, your teacher. We're looking at how do we solve quadratics by completing the square. Well, first of all, this doesn't make sense to most people because they're like, what square are you talking about? Well, we're talking about perfect square trinomials. Alright, and if you're still like, what's a perfect square trinomial? Those are the things like this, like x squared minus 10x plus 25. You see, if I want to solve things using square roots, I can't have an x squared and an x. And that's where these perfect square trinomials are really trying to help us out. Think about it. If we factored x squared minus 10x plus 25, we get down to just x minus 5 squared. This is the perfect square that I'm trying to find, okay? So when we say completing the square, we're trying to write out these perfect square trinomials so we can represent them as perfect squares. So let me show you how to do that. Alright, so let's say that we started with x squared plus 12x and we were asked to complete the square. Well, the first thing that we have to do is figure out what's this value of c that's going to complete the square. Well, to find that, we have to first take half the coefficient of the x term, so half of 12, and then square that result. That'll be c. So let's see, half of 12, so here, well, let's write it like this, x squared plus 12x, and then for my c I'm going to take half of the middle term, of the middle coefficient, right? And then I'm going to square it. So that c value is, half of 12 is 6, squared is 36. So in this case, c equals 36. Now, the next thing that I want to do is actually write this as a square of the binomial. That basically means just write it out factored. What two numbers multiply to 36 and add to 12? 6 and 6. You should always get the same number. So x plus 6 squared. Now I've represented it as a perfect square. And just to be technical here for a second, a square of the binomial, right? This is a binomial. It's two terms that are bound, that are grouped together. And then a square of that just means that this is squared. Okay, so again, let's go over it. We found c, it was 36, and then we wrote this as a square. You'll notice this later. The final part, this part right here, this number is always just going to be half of this number. If that 12 was negative, this would have been a negative 6. So let's try it again. All right, let's figure out how to complete the square for this one, x squared minus 9x. I'm going to figure out what I have to add to this to make it a perfect square. So we always just take half of whatever's connected. So we have 9 over 2. And we're going to square that number. Okay, so now I have x squared minus 9x. And then to square a fraction, you just square the numerator and square the denominator. 81 over 4. Now, this isn't as easy to factor, right? But remember that whenever we get it down to this squared thing, it's always just going to be half of this middle term. So it's just x minus 9 over 2 squared. All right, and in this case, c would have equaled 81 over 4. All right, so now that we know that skill, let's use it to solve an equation of a quadratic, which is basically just find the x-intercepts. So first off, if a does not equal 1, we have to divide everything by a. So here, this is just a 1x squared, so we're good on that. Next is get just the x and the x squared terms on one side. So I'm going to focus on trying to get these two guys by themselves. So I'm going to subtract 13. Notice that I left a big space here because I'm going to add in that term that's going to make it complete the square, just like what we've been doing. Alright, find c and add it to both sides. So let's do that the same way that we've been doing. I'm going to add half of the middle term squared to both sides. And if you're asking yourself, why do I have to do it to both sides? Remember that it's an equation. So whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. It's all about balance. All right, so this is always going to be x, half of negative 10 is minus 5 squared, equals negative 13 plus half of 10 is 5, squared is 25. All right, so that took care of step 4, right? The left as a binomial squared, and over here we just, now it's time to combine like terms. And we'll just go through the normal solving, like using square root steps. This is x minus 5 squared is equal to negative 13 plus 25 is 12, right? I've got the squared term by itself. Introduce the square root to both sides here. So I've got x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 12. Let's focus in on this a little bit more. X equals, move the 5 over, plus or minus the square root of 12. And we remember from simplifying square roots that 12 has a perfect square in it of 4. So you can pull out the square root of 4, and you have 2 square roots of 3. So going back through this problem, we moved the 13 to the other side, completed the square by adding our c, wrote it like this. Now that I have just an x, right, I can use square roots to solve. I'd actually like to go back and correct myself a little bit. It won't change our answer at all, but these should be negative 10s. Now once we square them, they become positive, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm just trying to be as technically correct as we can. Let's try it one more time. Remember that the first step was that if a does not equal 1, we need to divide everything by a. So whatever we do to one side, we'll do to the other. So here we have x squared minus 4x plus 9 equals 0. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait, I can't just throw away this 3. Right, but the thing is that we're solving. If we were factoring, we'd still need to keep that 3 on the outside. But since we're solving, we're okay. All right, here, let's get x squared and x by themselves. X squared minus 4x, leave yourself a space, equals negative 9. I'm going to add half of this middle term squared. All right, so on the left side we have x squared minus 4x. Half of negative 4 is negative 2. Squared is 4. Equals negative 9, also plus 4. So this is going to be x minus 2 squared is equal to negative 5. So got my square term by itself. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 2 is equal to plus or minus, remember the negative comes out as an I, square root of 5. And then to get x by itself, we just add the 2 to both sides. And now we've found the roots of this quadratic. All right, here are 2 problems that you can try. Go ahead and pause the video, and then just check your work with mine at the end. All right, so go ahead and pause the video again just so you can check your work with mine. And after that, you've finished completing the square. Goodbye.